Hello, welcome and salutations to Den of Otaku, Den of Geek's official anime discussion series where we break down all things anime, Japanese pop culture, and just the biggest developments going on in the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Kurland, and in this episode, I thought I would start off with a question to you all. What do you think is the greatest isekai story of all time? Is it Overlord? Perhaps you're a Sword Art Online fan. Maybe Inuyasha? Well, what if I told you that the greatest isekai ever made is actually The Wizard of Oz? That's right. In this Den of Otaku episode, we're traveling down that yellow brick road in honor of Wicked to talk about anime's unique relationship with The Wizard of Oz, which is actually surprisingly intricate. I think you're going to learn a lot in this one. And by the end of it, you're going to be saying, Toto, I don't think we're in Japan anymore. So let's do this, everyone, and let's go, and we're off to see the wizard. The wonderful Wizard of Oz anime, that is. Hit it. Alright everybody, we're talking The Wizard of Oz. Now, Wizard of Oz is one of the biggest movies of all time. It's a real American touchstone, but I don't think it gets a lot of respect as a franchise. You know, Wizard of Oz has been around since the year 1900. It's over 100 years old. There are 40 canonical books in the series, even more than that though. L. Frank Baum, the creator, he wrote 14 of them. Everyone loves The Wizard of Oz. I mean, you see so many movies and TV shows paying reference to Wizard of Oz.
Now fly! Fly!
Slay!
There's a real shorthand with that film that a lot of people appreciate. Even David Lynch is all about Wizard of Oz. There's references to that movie in so much of his stuff, especially Wild at Heart. And if you're on David Lynch's radar, you're doing something right. I wanted to kind of set a baseline here and talk about how Wizard of Oz is really quite possibly the best isekai series ever made. And to begin with, isekai is an anime genre that basically takes a character and whisks them away to a new fantastical world. Sometimes they're literally taken there, sometimes they die and are reincarnated there. This very much fits with what Wizard of Oz is doing. Dorothy, she goes to Oz, she really sets roots there and helps change it in a big way. And a lot of isekai series, you have a character who is a little unsure of themselves, perhaps like they lack a certain confidence in the real life, but they go to this new world, they rediscover who they are, and they prove themselves to be kind of like a chosen figure at the end of the day. And that's very much what's going on in The Wizard of Oz. I mean, Dorothy even fits the mold of like having a cuddly, cute isekai animal sidekick in the form of Toto. She goes on this adventure with her dog. And I think a big reason that isekai series are so popular and why they've been so successful for so long, it's a fun form of like fantastical escapism, but at the same time, it holds a mirror up to reality and helps redefine what these characters thought they knew. Like in Wizard of Oz, this becomes very explicit in the sense that Oz has all these analogs to people from Dorothy's life, and it gets into the idea of, is this a dream? Is it reality? And it really gets a lot of mileage out of that idea that the isekai genre has had a lot of fun with. And at the same time, isekai series, a lot of the time, will have a character just properly appreciate where they came from. Not all the time, but in some isekai series, they'll stay in this fantastical world and not go home. But a lot of the time, they will go back to where they came from and have a newfound appreciation for it. They'll be like, my life wasn't that bad after all. I now have like the emotional tools to kind of deal with these problems, and I'm a better version of myself that can really value what home is. And I mean, Wizard of Oz has that whole mantra, there's no place like home, but I honestly think like that is such a fitting mission statement for isekai series as a whole. There are so many isekai series where that is basically the message that you're getting out of it, that you can go somewhere new, discover new things, prove yourself to be a hero, but at the end of the day, like, you really want to just go back to what you know and are comfortable with. And Wizard of Oz plays with this too. Like, at the end of Wizard of Oz, Dorothy returns home, but you know, she always makes her way back to Oz. She moves to Oz permanently with her family in the 6th Wizard of Oz book. book, and it really kind of plays with that idea of where your true home is at the end of the day. And there's a lot of isekai value in Wizard of Oz, but at the same time, I think it's an interesting example of just looking at some of the more controversial and maligned Wizard of Oz adaptations over the years. Like, there's the original movie, which is an all-time classic, and everyone loves this, but a lot of the other adaptations have missed the mark, just failed to kind of realize and celebrate what Wizard of Oz should be. Return to Oz is the second movie. It adapts the second and third novels, and it isn't a misfire. Like, there are a lot of people that love that film and appreciate that it goes a little darker, but there's a lot of other stuff that just doesn't connect. Like Sam Raimi's Oz the Great and Powerful really didn't work for people. There's like a gritty Wizard of Oz TV show that came out called Emerald City that has Vincent D'Onofrio as the wizard and is kind of like Game of Thrones meets Wizard of Oz. The whole thing's directed by Tarsem Singh. It's actually like a really cool show, but people weren't into it really. There was a sci-fi series called Tin Man, which again takes that kind of grittier approach to Wizard of Oz, but none of these things caught on, and it's really Wicked that has now redefined what a Wizard of Oz story is that's really resonating with people. And I think at the end of the day, what all these adaptations are showing is that people just want to spend more time in Oz, that this is a fun universe, that there's so much to explore in it. We keep trying to do movies or TV shows because there's so much value in what this is. Wicked has done a great job of that by recontextualizing it as a musical and kind of doing an origin story of how a lot of Oz came to be. But I think it's important to mention that anime kind of got there first, and there are some really interesting anime series that adapt Wizard of Oz, push it to new places, and really do the franchise justice in a way that a lot of these other adaptations have failed to do. And so I'd love to just kind of celebrate what anime has done with the Wizard of Oz.
No, I know we're not in Kansas.
The first anime adaptation of Wizard of Oz is 1982's aptly titled The Wizard of Oz. And this is pretty much just an anime adaptation of the classical movie. It does a good job of like, okay, we love Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz was a big hit in Japan as well. So let's take that framework and kind of turn it into an anime. It's very safe in that respect, but it is still an interesting example of anime playing in that kind of environment. And so it was released by Toho. It's directed by Fumihiko Takayama, who is a very interesting choice for a director. He's someone who doesn't have many directorial credits to his name and is usually associated with like science fiction and giant robot series. He's perhaps best known for Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket and also Super Dimension Fortress Macross. So the idea of taking like a sci-fi guy and putting him in a fantasy adaptation of Wizard of Oz is a really creative idea that kind of adds something new to the equation. It's animated by Topcraft, which was a small studio that later became a part of Studio Ghibli. The music in Wizard of Oz is also done by Joe Hisaishi, who most people will know as Hayao Miyazaki's right-hand man. If you think of any of your favorite music from a Miyazaki film, it more than likely came from Joe Hisaishi. He had his first Golden Globe nomination last year for Boy and the Heron, and I kind of just love that Studio Ghibli doesn't exclusively do isekai series, but it's really their bread and butter at the end of the day. And when you think of isekai, a lot of Ghibli stuff comes to mind, whether it's Spirited Away or Howl's Moving Castle or Boy and the Heron. So I kind of love the idea that this Wizard of Oz movie from 1982 is kind of like the building blocks to what Ghibli would later do, both as an animation studio and also just the music. Like, this sounds like a prototype for what would later be done in Miyazaki movies. So there's a really strong foundation there that really is a good team together if you're going to do a Wizard of Oz anime. What's particularly interesting about this movie, though, is that despite how it was made in 1982, it wasn't released in Japan until 1986. It was actually released for US audiences in English first, and that was very uncommon, especially in the 1980s, and I think it kind of just shows where Japan's mindset was with something like this. It was a bit of a jarring idea to take a Western property and turn that into an anime, and the fact that they wanted English audiences to have access to this several years before it came out in Japan, I think kind of just establishes that Japan was like, this is a Western property, they deserve this first. And in the end, it's kind of like an anime that was made for America rather than an anime that was made and then also made its way to America. And it's just an interesting kind of look at where sensibilities were in the early 80s versus where they are now. And that kind of Western Japanese schism carries through these Wizard of Oz adaptations.
Could you use your magical powers to get me back to Kansas, please?
Well, I don't know. Where's Kansas?
It's in the United States of America.
So the Japanese airing of it came out in 1986, and this kind of segged into a proper anime series of The Wizard of Oz called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This came out in 1986. It's a 52-episode anime, and it has a lot of the same team in place from the Wizard of Oz movie. Akira Miyazaki wrote both of them. And what's interesting about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is that it adapts 4 separate Wizard of Oz novels from L. Frank Baum's text. You have the original, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, you have The Marvelous Land of Oz, Ozma of Oz, and then The Emerald City of Oz. Those are the first, second, third, and sixth Oz novels, and it does a really interesting job of kind of marrying those texts together to tell one bigger story. And what's very cool about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz anime is that to date, it is still the most accurate adaptation of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz that exists. And so if you're a real like L. Frank Baum purist, this is worth seeing just because it really does do a great job of capturing the original novel so well. Now, what it does with the second, third, and sixth novels, there's a little more liberties taken there. It doesn't work to like work Dorothy into these stories and kind of connect ideas together. In that sense, it's very much like what the Hannibal TV show did and how it was kind of just like a remix of Thomas Harris's novels and put them all together into something that makes sense for the series at hand. But I think that's interesting to see that the Wizard of Oz movie was kind of just very much a straight adaptation. This series, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, begins to take more liberties, find its personality, and figure out how to make this series its own. It's directed by Hiroshi Saito, who is probably best known for the Ashita no Joe anime, which is like one of the better boxing anime. So just like with Wizard of Oz, they've taken a kind of against the grain director that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a fantasy series and put them in charge to kind of do something very interesting and different. The animation style is another fascinating kind of reference point here. When it comes to the animation in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, it has a style that's very much aping what went on in this other program, Nippon Animation's World Masterpiece Theater. And World Masterpiece Theater was basically an anime that took titles from across the world, but a lot of it is Western literature. So there's episodes that deal with like the adventures of Tom Sawyer, Anne of Green Gables, Pinocchio, Little Women even makes the cut, Swiss Family Robinson. And what's going on in World Masterpiece Theater, there's a very unstylized look. It's almost like anime is trying to create a Western animation look. And that in itself is really kind of interesting. It's almost the reverse of what you see going on now with a lot of Western animation. You have shows like Blood of Zeus and Castlevania and Invincible Fight Girl that aren't anime, but have animation styles that want you to think that they are anime. This is the reverse of that. These are anime, but they want you to think it's almost a Western animated series. And so that animation style is present in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz to kind of, again, pay reference to the fact that this is a Western story at the end of the day, and that they do want it to kind of fit into that mold. Now, another really interesting detail about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is this was a Japanese series. It aired in Japan, but when it came to its English dub, this was produced in Montreal by Cinar. It aired on HBO in the United States, and then it was syndicated in Canada, and Cinar also produced the French dub for the show. What went on in the English version of it is they really erased the complete Japanese identity of it. They created a new title sequence for it that has all this clunky CGI, which is very of the time, but wasn't at all present in the original version. They have a new English theme song by an English group called Parachute Club. Margot Kidder is the narrator. And they even went so far as to get rid of all the Japanese cast and crew in the credits. What you sometimes see when dubs were being done in like the 90s and stuff, is they would air the English credits and then Japanese credits would follow afterwards. This anime, though, completely removed that in the English airing, as if it wanted to trick audiences into thinking this isn't a Japanese production. The only thing it shared with the Japanese airing in the end was the animation, and even the animation is something that's trying to look like a Western animated series. So there's a really interesting feedback loop that this is a Western property that was made into an anime that is then being retrofitted to be American in English again. And it's really kind of remarkable that if you were doing a Wizard of Oz anime now, you would want to celebrate that aspect of it. You'd really want to lean into the fact that this is an anime, that this is a different culture that is taking a cherished story and giving their take on it. And I mean, you can look even right now, there's a Lord of the Rings anime in theaters that is very much embracing the fact that this is a Western story that is being redone and retold in the form of an anime. And a lot of people get excited about that. That's a really cool idea, but it shows you just how different things were a few decades back, that something like this was actively trying to erase the Japanese DNA of it and turn it into this English show that in the end just wasn't as effective and turns it into this interesting outlier at the end of the day.
If this isn't Kansas, where in America is it?
My dear, you're not in America, you're in the land of Oz. Goodness, didn't you know?
The Land of Oz? I've never heard of it.
The whole English version of it as well, it was never released on physical media, but what they did is they split the series up into 4 separate movies that kind of edit a lot of the episodes down and try to tell these new stories in movie form. So again, even that, the English version of it is not just erasing the identity, but it's also transforming it into a more palatable, English version of something that kind of goes against what the original series was trying to do. And so, for the longest time, it was hard to find an effective, accurate version of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz outside of Japan. In 2017, Discotek, they put together a DVD release. Discotek is a great company. They are one of the better companies when it comes to preserving anime and just bringing it back to life for series that have kind of gone under the radar or don't get the attention they deserve. Discotek went out of their way to kind of have the entire English dub on a set. They also uploaded the first 3 episodes with subtitles on their YouTube channel, so to kind of test the waters there to see, okay, we gave people the English dub, but are they interested in getting the original version of it too? And now you can watch the whole thing on Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll has The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in English, it has it in Japanese, and you can toggle between them and kind of see what works, what doesn't, how it was changed. And I think just that evolution in itself just shows you how far the anime industry has come. That there was a time when The Wonderful Wizard of Oz could only be seen in these sanitized, edited down movies, and now you can watch the whole thing in its original language on a readily available streaming service. And it's just exciting that this kind of thing isn't something that you really have to go out of your way to hunt for now. That it's out there, that it's being celebrated, and you can just get a better idea of what anime wanted to do with The Wizard of Oz and why this show kind of resonated with people in the 80s.
I'd like to go home if it's possible.
Yes, poor Dorothy. She dropped her magic shoes in Kansas. She has no way of getting back now, unless you can help her get home, Glinda.
Now, the final Wizard of Oz anime that came out, which to me is what I think is the most interesting one, is 1992's The Adventures of Space Oz. And this is a series that completely does something new. It takes the basic Wizard of Oz framework and fully reinvents it. We saw in Wizard of Oz and Wonderful Wizard of Oz, these are still series that are adapting something, that are still very much paying respect to the source material and trying to explore that in a new light. This goes in a very different direction. It's set in the year 2060. Dorothy and Toto live on New Kansas, a planet. They get swept up in a storm and get taken to the Galaxy of Oz. Galaxy of Oz used to have a tyrannical witch that ran over it called Gloomhilda. Gloomhilda is banished by Dr. Oz, a scientist, and now Gloomhilda is on the outskirts of the universe. She's amassed a space army and she wants to attack Oz and reclaim it for hers. So Dr. Oz gets Dorothy. He says we can stop Gloomhilda if we find these 3 crystals that have been scattered throughout the galaxy. The crystal of love, wisdom, and courage. Dorothy is put together with her Tin Man, Scarecrow, and Lion, surrogate characters, but in this case, they are Plant Man, Lion Man, and Chopper, who is kind of like a C-3PO-like android. Everything about this is so cool. I really love how it's revisited the source material and done something very different with it. The whole idea of just doing Oz in space and needing to hop between different planets and go across the galaxy to find crystals that are vital to kill the witch is such a fun, different idea. The whole idea that the crystals are like love, wisdom, and courage is a smart way to take like a real tenet of the original Wizard of Oz and do something different with it. And the whole idea that Dorothy has these companions that are like aliens and androids rather than the Tin Man and Scarecrow and Lion is such a fun, different idea of doing something else with this series. And it's honestly how you would adapt The Wizard of Oz now. It feels very ahead of its time for a series that came out in 1992. It's almost like when you see video games now that have things like The Lies of P, which is this really like edgy Pinocchio game. The DS had this fringe Wizard of Oz game called Beyond the Yellow Brick Road, which is kind of similar to this, but honestly, The Adventures of Space Oz is doing more with it. And I think it's just kind of cool to see how anime started in this very grounded place with The Wizard of Oz and then takes some huge swings with this final series, all of which is just over the span of a decade. We started in 1982, go to 1986, and then 1992. These are 3 Oz series that came out within 10 years of each other, and they build to such a beautiful idea that, in my opinion, no other Oz media has done an effective job of recapturing. And what's interesting too about The Adventures of Space Oz is that it has kind of become lost media, so to speak. There are 26 episodes. They aired in Japan, directed by a Beyblade director too, by the way. So again, just keeping with the whole theme of these very different directors being involved with each of these products that kind of bring their own special style to it. Adventures of Space Oz, it was never rebroadcast, it was never released on physical media, and the only kind of preservation of it is in North America. They condensed the series down to a 75-minute movie called The Wonderful Galaxy of Oz that takes the first episode and just clips and stuff of the last few episodes and puts them together. And for the longest time, if you wanted to check out The Adventures of Space Oz or Wonderful Galaxy of Oz, that was the only way you could do it, with this pared down movie that again is dubbed in English and is kind of missing some of the original idea. And that was it. And so people are still trying to find the full series. In 2019, there was an exciting development that all 26 episodes were uploaded on YouTube in Arabic dub. So even still, sometimes you get these instances where like you'll get one kind of leap like that really helps audiences at least see something visually, but it's still like a few steps away of getting the real thing. It's in Arabic, so you still need to translate that or do something different with it. But even now, The Adventures of Space Oz has kind of become this black sheep. It still doesn't have representation in Japan. It's not streaming on Crunchyroll. So despite how it's kind of like the coolest and edgiest and just taking the most risks as far as Wizard of Oz anime are concerned, it's kind of been like buried over time. And I don't know, just it's a very interesting trajectory for anime to take with this franchise, really embracing it. And now with Wicked out doing these exciting things, it'll be interesting to see if more Wizard of Oz anime comes to be. I mean, it would be so cool if somebody tried doing a remake of The Wonderful Galaxy of Oz, or just returning to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and doing a full isekai adaptation that covers at least L. Frank Baum's 14 original novels. There's still a lot of work to do there. I mean, even if you took Wicked and just turned that into an anime, not the rest of The Wizard of Oz, but just Wicked as a touchstone, I think there's more to do. And I think the fact that this was such a hot property for Japan for 10 years and now has kind of been erased is interesting material to touch on. And it's kind of the same in North America. I mean, Wizard of Oz has kind of come in and out of favor over time, but Wicked is doing really big things. It's become this international success, and it'll be really interesting to see if that has a ripple effect that carries over into anime, just like how anime's Wizard of Oz adaptations kind of fed into what Western culture was doing with the property.
Plant Man, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, okay. Sure thing.
Are we in New Kansas?
I'm afraid not.
So we spent a lot of time talking on Wizard of Oz and its relationship to anime, but I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit and just talk about Wicked specifically in the fact that that is a musical. There's a very interesting reputation in Japan when it comes to taking celebrated anime properties and turning them into live-action stage shows. There's like a stage show of Spirited Away, Dragon Ball, Naruto, Demon Slayer. These are very popular, and basically any of the bigger animes, what they'll do is they'll try to adapt it in live action on stage, and there's like an inherent thrill to seeing something as stylized as anime go on in a room in front of you that's somehow being accomplished by real people on a stage without editing and all these other fancier tricks. So that's been going on for a long time, but somewhat of a more recent trend is that there have been stage musicals of big anime properties, and this is a trend that continues to grow, and I think it's a really cool development of what's going on. There have been stage musicals of Sailor Moon, there's like a Bleach rock opera, there's Attack on Titan, Death Note, Your Lie in April is a really big one. Even sports anime like Prince of Tennis and Haikyuu, those have been turned into stage musicals, and I think that's just such a cool way to experiment with storytelling. I mean, to begin with, anime is one of the more heightened and stylized forms of storytelling. You have these grandiose, larger-than-life figures, but that's the same with musicals. I mean, I am a huge fan of musicals, and when they work, it's unlike anything else. They're these really transcendent experiences that have characters culminating in song because their emotions are so extravagant. And the idea of taking something as heightened as a musical and combining it with something as heightened as an anime is a really cool idea. Like the Death Note musical and Attack on Titan's musical are two of the better examples, because you literally have characters who are turning into titans on stage, spinning around on like ODM gear, or these giant Shinigami doing stuff. That's such a ridiculous spectacle to see, especially when characters are expressing it through song, and it's so cool that has continued and is becoming a new trend. There's a producer, Frank Wildhorn, who's kind of become like the auteur in this film. He was responsible for the Death Note musical, Your Lie in April's musical, and Fist of the North Star's musical, and it's unclear if he'll just be content with kind of doing this anime musical trilogy, or if he'll continue to adapt more stuff down the road, but I think it's really interesting to have someone who has actually like repeatedly returned to this well and done stuff with it. And what happens is when you have more people championing this material, it's not just restricted to Japan. There was a long time when any anime stage musical, if you weren't in Japan, you weren't going to see it. But the United Kingdom has really embraced this. Like Your Lie in April did really great work in the UK, and even Attack on Titan's musical had a limited run in New York City, and it's really cool because sometimes you'll have people adapting the musical itself into English so people can understand it, and by doing that you're kind of losing something in translation. But in the case of the Attack on Titan musical, it was still performed in its original Japanese, and they just have subtitles kind of projected on stage, which is a really clever way to like give you the original experience and still have you understand what's going on. And I think it's just a growing trend of where anime is going. Like even just 10 years ago, it was still kind of rare for like more niche anime films to be airing in North American theaters. Now that's become commonplace, and so the fact that we have these anime stage musicals making their way to New York, making their way to London, and these other places, I think it's just kind of normalizing that and showing that people want to see this, that we can sell out a theater in New York City to see an Attack on Titan musical is a really beautiful thing. It's almost like there was a real phase when like it was in vogue to take a horror film and turn that into a stage musical. You saw like Evil Dead the musical, there was Teeth, Teeth with like the killer tooth vagina. At the time, that was the coolest thing you could do with a musical. But now, the idea of taking an anime and turning that into a living, breathing musical is the next evolution of that, I think. And at this point, no one has taken these stage musicals and actually then made them films like what we've seen with Wicked. That was a stage musical that is now a cinematic musical. But it'll be interesting to see if that's the next step in this. Like if someone takes the Death Note musical and films a cinematic version of it. I think that's where this will be going next. And if someone takes that risk, I think it'll be exciting to see what it leads to. You know, all it takes is one person to do it very well, and you have a whole new trend going on. So I don't think this is the end we're going to be seeing of anime musicals. There's definitely going to be more of those, but I do think it's very exciting that not only will they be leaving Japan and reaching a larger audience that more people can appreciate, we might even see them bridge the gap and become actual films. I mean, we have a lot of live-action anime movies, so why not just go one step further and do live-action anime movie musicals? Now, before we go, fellow otaku, we have just enough time to do our Big 3 segment. What is the Big 3? For those of you who don't know about Big 3, this is basically our odds and ends segment. There's so much anime out there, it's impossible to watch everything. I can't watch everything. So this is our way to kind of highlight some certain series that have slipped through the cracks. We've spent a lot of time in this episode talking about Wizard of Oz anime, and so I thought I would kind of lean into a bit of a trend that's going on right now. They're calling it Glickid. The kids are calling it Glickid. Now, I'm not a fan of portmanteaus of this style, but this whole Glickid thing is taking Wicked, is taking Gladiator 2, and it's like, see them together. Basically, it's just Barbenheimer, but with 2 new movies, because we love just repeating the past, evidently. Think Glickid is stupid. I don't think that's a good idea, but because we've already spent so much time talking about Wizard of Oz anime, I thought it would be a nice idea to do a Gladiator 2 edition of the Big 3 and highlight some anime that deals specifically with the Roman Empire, because that's interesting. You don't see that a lot of the time, and there are some really cool series out there that are very much in dialogue with Gladiator and Gladiator 2. Cestvs, the Roman Fighter. Cestvs, the Roman Fighter, it started as a manga that ran from 1997 to 2009 and then had a whole sequel. So there's a lot of material there. It came out in 2021 as an 11-episode Netflix anime. And basically it deals with a young orphaned boy who becomes enslaved by the Roman Empire and goes to this brutal gladiatorial school. And basically he trains to be a pugilist, which is like a fancy way of saying a boxer. And basically Cestvs has to fight for his freedom. If he wins X number of fights, he can be free again. And that's very much in line with what Gladiator and Gladiator 2 are doing. It's this whole idea of someone going through these graduated battles, and at the end, hopefully, they can kind of earn their freedom at the end of the day. This is a entertaining series, if nothing else, that it does a good job of kind of showing the moral and ethical dilemma of such a gladiator concept in the first place. Like, I mean, Cestvs has to fight to become free again, but everyone else he's fighting is in the same situation as he is. Like, these are all people that just want to be free. They don't necessarily deserve to die. And at the end, he progressively loses, like, his humanity and what made him who he is with each passing fight. So in the end, it's like he can become a free person, but is he then even still the same person that he was when he entered this in the first place? And that's really rich material to explore in a series. There's a new emperor that is causing all of this in Cestvs called Emperor Nero, so you get into like his political machinations at the time. There's a lot of training sequences that like just show what it takes to become a seasoned gladiator. And there's just a lot to enjoy there, whether it's the action, the character drama, the dilemma of what is going on with these gladiators in the first place. And it's just a good counterpoint to Gladiator, I think, and if you've enjoyed those movies, here's an anime version of it that does a good job with it too. If you like it, please check out the manga. I think the manga does a much better job of telling the story. In 11 episodes, you get quite a bit of character development, but when you have over a decade of manga to pull from, you really get to see Cestvs' story, how he evolves, and just what becomes of all of this. And it's any story of that where someone is losing their sense of self and becoming someone else, but not realizing it in the moment, is really creative material to explore. The next series is Hashire Melos. Now, technically, this is dealing with the Greek Empire, not the Roman Empire, but there's enough similarities going on here that I thought it was still worth bringing to attention. Hashire Melos, it deals with a Greek countryman named Melos who is accused and arrested for a conspiracy involving the king. So he becomes a prisoner. However, though, he's given a temporary furlough to go to his sister's wedding. He has 3 days to get to his sister's wedding and just enjoy this, which is really quite nice on their part. Most prisoners can't just go to a wedding. But while he's gone, they take an accomplished sculptor and put him as a hostage in Melos's place. He can't do any funny business. He can't just run away and escape, because if he does, this revered sculptor is going to be killed in his place. And again, it just has a lot of interesting storytelling in terms of retribution, like the cost of freedom, like what it means to be a person at the end of the day. And it really just explores the Greek like caste system and how humanity could be taken by people in a really interesting way. This is a film that was released in 1981 as a 68-minute movie. That film does a good job of it, but in 1992, it was remade, again called Hashire Melos, but they added an exclamation point on it this time. I think that's a great idea. Anytime you're doing a remake, add an exclamation point to it, because like, what shows you're more serious than an exclamation point at the end of the day? But the remake is, I think, a better story in the end. It's 107 minutes versus 68 minutes, so you do get a better story. The animation is better. What drew me to it in the first place is that some of the art is done by Satoshi Kon, who we're big fans of on Otaku. Satoshi Kon did, Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, Paranoia Agent, Paprika. He's one of my favorite people, and I was doing a real deep dive into just his entire filmography, and I don't think Hashire Melos gets a lot of attention just because he is just an artist on it. And there's a bunch of series of his that do kind of slip through the cracks because he wasn't exactly a creative in the writing or directing sense. But it looks gorgeous because of Kon's work on it. And if you're a real completionist who wants to see everything Kon has done, which isn't that difficult because he was only around for so long, this is a great blind spot to fill in. Both of these movies aren't that long, so I'd say watch the original 80s Hashire Melos, then watch the 90s version. Compare and contrast them, see what's different. But if you have to only watch one, check out the 92 movie, because it's just beautiful. And it's rare to get an anime film that is kind of dealing with Greek empires, and this is one of the better examples of it. And the last big three title we want to highlight is Thermae Romae Novae. Now, this is a fun palate cleanser from the first two series. Hashire Melos and Cestvs the Roman Fighter are very morose series. They're very bleak. They really show the hopelessness of slavery and just gladiators in general. Thermae Romae Novae is very silly in a kind of ludicrous way. It's a 11-episode Netflix series from 2022 that's basically like the Hot Tub Time Machine as an anime dealing with the Roman Empire. It deals with a famous Roman architect named Lucius who winds up time traveling to modern day Japan in a bathtub. So there's very much that hot tub time machine bathtub element going on here. Lucius goes to modern day Japan and he kind of just explores Japan's bathhouses and hot springs and then uses that knowledge to better his life back in the Roman Empire. It's a very silly series. It's a series that's very educational, that teaches you a lot about architecture, Roman Empire, Japan at the same time, but isn't very cloying or manipulative on it. It is educational, but in a way that's very fun, very silly, and just feels natural. It makes a lot of sense despite how so many unconventional elements are thrown into this anime. And I mean, even at the end, one of the weirdest things about this anime is at the end of each episode, you get a live action segment where the story's writer is just showing you bathhouses and hot springs from Japan. So not only do you get to experience them in the context of the anime, but you get to see them in the real world and be like, oh, okay, this is what they were talking about. This is what's going on here. And it's just such a random element to throw on, but one that really kind of amplifies the series in a fun way. The show really took me by surprise. Again, it's only 11 episodes, so it's not a huge commitment, and it's just a fun way to kind of learn about both Japan and Rome in a way that's really against the grain. So once again, for the big three, Gladiator Edition, we have Cestvs the Roman Fighter, we have Hashire Melos, exclamation point, and Thermae Romae Novae.
Oh, 何かが
And unfortunately, fellow otaku, that's all the time we have in this episode before I get isekai'd back to reality. We'd once again like to thank you for going on this adventure with us, because without you, we've got nothing, baby. We'll see you later, space cowboys. Watch out for those cyclones, tornadoes, Wizard of Oz.